This is We All Be News and Radio.
Ron Hurd, get up out of bed. Let's go. Let's go. Ron Hurd. That's the word. Get out of bed. Give me a jingle. My number 051. Get out of bed. Let's go. Don't be afraid. This is Herb Smith calling you. Herb Smith. All right, I know you're famous and all that kind of stuff, but let's go. Get out of bed.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, scholars and laymen. That was Brother Cliff Solo with Malcolm's Wisdom, which was done in honor of his fallen comrade, Brother Malcolm Shabazz, the first male heir of the late, great L. Malik Shabazz. And I'm your host for this empowerment segment, RQC2H2, the artivist. Feel free to listen in online and call in at 646-652-4593. That's area code 646-652-4593. And I'm on with my co-host, the Queen of Shira. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
That's good to have you on. I know this is your wheelhouse right here. This is your subject matter right here. So feel free to, got to do call out. What you got to call out, question what you got to question. Are you ready for this segment?
I am.
All right, cool. So feel free to grace it. And I think we got our good friend from B-More, or Tubman City, as Precise Science would say, Tubman City. Wonderful researcher, advocate, for truth, COINTELPRO expert. He did a phenomenal book and documentary called, I believe, let me get it right, the FBI War Against Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, worth checking out. He just out there, he's a truth seeker like so many of us traveling this road. None other than Brother John Potash. Are you there?
Good. Thanks for having me, Ron.
Man, it's an honor to have you, man. I was like, I saw the B more. I said, I hope that's him. So, man, it's great to have you on, man. I know this is your wheelhouse. You're an expert what's going on. There's a lot of things going on right now in the news. But I also want to get your take on what happened to Brother Malcolm Shabazz. I know that you actually met him, correct? Or you had a chance to meet him, if I'm not mistaken?
Well, I was supposed to introduce him in a Baltimore forum. It was part of the Legacy Tour. Fred Hampton Jr. was speaking with Malcolm Shabazz, and I was giving the introduction for them. And Malcolm Shabazz didn't show up, and it was about one of 4 to 6 different times on that Legacy Tour that Malcolm Shabazz didn't show up. And so Fred Hampton Jr. found out that it was because there was an infiltrator in his group. His Minister of Information, Jr., was sabotaging that Legacy Tour and continuing to have him, show up in the wrong place. And so, I was supposed to meet him and supposed to introduce him. So, but I do want to get into the targeting of him when you're ready. I could do it right now, or I could do it later. But it's a long, drawn-out targeting. What's that?
Yeah, go ahead. Do it now.
Yeah, well, I think it started back when he was 12 years old, because an FBI agent became the boyfriend of Kabila Shabazz, and it later came out that was, he was an agent, and he tried to set her up and basically frame her in an attempt to kill Minister Louis Farrakhan, having her think and believe that Farrakhan was behind her father's death, Malcolm X's death. And in that frame-up and in her sentencing, Malcolm Shabazz was taken away from her and put in the custody of Malcolm X's wife. And a 12-year-old Malcolm Shabazz was so upset about being taken away from his mother that he acted out as many kids would, and he was end up starting a small fire, and he thought that acting out would lead the state to stop that and return him to his mother, saying he just doesn't do well with his grandmother. He wants to be with his mother, of course. And so it was that fire that they say, of course, killed Malcolm X's wife, and that's what sent him to a reform school and started him, on a rough path, to begin with. But that's, of course, all that the news talks about. they don't talk about the fact that after he got out of boarding school and maybe one or two small crimes, after he got away from all that, he was doing some great work, in promoting positive causes and just speaking all over, doing great activist work around all kinds of leftist causes. And then the FBI started plotting against him. One way was, of course, what I described as this FBI infiltrator of Fred Hampton Jr.'s group, the Prisoners of Conscience Committee, and other ways were FBI detaining him when he was headed to Lebanon, and then the FBI spying on him, as he said, in the last months of his life. He said, they were watching him and doing all kinds of things to him before this mysterious death. And we don't know exactly how he was killed, but it's obviously suspicious. And so that's what I know so far.
Oh, I'm glad you shared it with us, because it's really setting up the show. I mean, what we need to talk about. And I got another great, brilliant scholar, activist, advocate on the line. I think this is him. I'm hoping, I'm praying this is him. This is a brother that's phenomenal, doing a lot of community activism work, but very much what a scholar practitioner should be. And I just want to thank him for spending so much of his time with us today. Brother Jahi Issa, are you here?
Hey, I'm here. Thanks a lot, Brother Ron.
Man, it's an honor to have you, man. I was hoping that was you, but I was praying.
Hey, Professor Issa.
Dr. Issa,
good to be talking to you again, Professor Issa.
Yeah, I'm just back from the Odunde Festival up in Philadelphia. That's the largest indigenous African festival in the United States. And so I'm fresh back from it.
Now, I want to get your take on everything, because you actually had a relationship with Malcolm Shabazz, correct? I'm correct in saying that?
Well, yeah. I was introduced to Malcolm Shabazz via Randy Short. We met at the University of Maryland around this time last year. He was speaking there. And we actually met at the airport and then the University of Maryland, and talked to him a few times on the phone, and talked to him via Facebook. We have an article that'll be up. I'm basically finished with the article. It's called Who Assassinated Malcolm Shabazz? And, the first part of the article we're talking about, what we're looking at is the 3 generations of black male political leadership assassinated by the government or government operatives. We can go back to his great-grandfather, Earl Little. Also, we all know about his tragic death at the hand of a white supremacist group. And then we know about his uncles. Earl's uncle was lynched. Another uncle was also killed by a white supremacist mob. So we're talking about generation after generation, black male leadership within one family wiped out by the government or government operatives. And so we're getting into some things like that and other issues that in this article it'll be up on the HarrietTubman.com. It should be up by tomorrow on the Harriet Tubman.
Okay, the HarrietTubman.com. I'll put that in the chat room. The way you said that, because that's something you started not so long ago. We need that type of voice. Where like right now, it's funny because we got this quote unquote black president in the White House, but it's like black media has been silenced or is being silenced. So we need the HarrietTubman.com to speak these truths of power. And also, I want to get somebody out. They've been patient. Well, I don't know if they want to say anything as it relates to this conversation, but they've been on the line, so I want to give them a shot. Area code 512. You there? You want to speak?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for being patient. Wait, how you doing?
I'm doing good. And yourself?
I'm blessed. I've been resurrected. Mm-hmm.
The thing I wanted to say is in regards to JR. There's another murder that he's also connected to, and that's the Chauncey Bailey murder.
Oh, wow, okay. All right, what's your name, by the way?
JR from Prisoners of Conscience Committee.
Oh, great, man. Okay, so like, you know, I know. Can you refresh people?
But he was an infiltrator. Of course, he wasn't really, you know. Fred Hampton
okay, JR. Tell us who. Okay, hold on. Tell us who J.R. Bowery is. Come on, please tell us who this guy is while we're talking about him.
JR, he has different monikers, but he's also known as the Minister of Information. There's some older activists who did not agree with him in calling himself the Minister of Information, but that's what he called himself. He also goes by Cleveland Bowery, and he also goes by Jay, short but funky. And he just has a history of sabotaging movements, sabotaging projects, sabotaging people trying to come together and fight injustice. And he's also known as the coattail rider. He was riding Malcolm's coattail. And he's also connected to the murder of Chauncey Bailey. And you can see this at the website, thechaunceybaileyproject.org. Let me spell it out. Chauncey spelled it CHAUNCEY, Bailey, BAILEY, project, PROJECT.org. And you can right-click on the search. You can do a search for Valerie's name, BALLREY, and you'll see the documents that's linking him to Chauncey Bailey's murder. Chauncey Bailey was a journalist who had done a lot, a black journalist, hard to find, who had been through a lot. And he was just trying to turn the African American newspaper Observer into an information tool for everyone to use to showcase our news. And he was killed by members of your Muslim bakery out in by Yusuf Bey's group out in Oakland. And Yusuf Bey, the fourth, was arrested for that murder and was talking to Valerie less than 2 minutes after Chauncey Bailey got killed. He was talking to Valerie outside of Chauncey Bailey's apartment. And Valerie will not discuss what happened, and he denies his involvement. He's also attacked people for investigating Chauncey Bailey's murder. And this is a fellow journalist. J.R. claims that he's a journalist, and he's up here, you know, attacking a dead journalist who did more in the community than he did. I just feel like, you know, the truth needs to be said out there. J.R. said he welcomed questions online on his Facebook account, and he's not responding. And, in fact, he loves the fact that he's getting a lot of attention. And he currently works for the San Francisco Bayview newspaper. And they try to exploit Malcolm's murder to showcase the book that they were promoting. They have since removed the cover, but J.R. has a lot of explaining to do. And he was the one who introduced Rumek to Malcolm, which ended up, Malcolm going to Mexico. Circumstances really hazy, and he ends up dying there. The people that J.R. introduced Malcolm to.
Sister, I have a question for you. So what do you suspect that Chauncey Bailey was silent through the murder? What's the reasoning behind that? Just curious.
Chauncey Bailey was he was an investigative reporter and an investigative journalist, and that's a skill set that is not too common anymore. It's because of budget cuts.
Right.
Investigative journalists do a lot. They're the ones who solve a lot of our stories. They put out information out there for us to use. And Chauncey Bailey, he was a civil rights leader in his own right in terms of journalism.
Okay, thank you so much. Because I didn't even hear about his murder. So I just went on the Chauncey Bailey Project site and reading the story about it. So thank you so much for sharing that and putting that information out for us.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Professor Issa said and Dr. Short said. What Professor Issa said about, Malcolm, Earl Little, Malcolm X's father, being killed by white supremacists, there's just a lot of research that shows that the U.S. intelligence kind of had agents inside of both the Black Legion that killed Malcolm X's father, Earl Little, as well as the inside of the KKK, from some of the most major killings and targetings, and so a number of these white supremacist groups end up acting as an extension of what U.S. intelligence goals are. And so that, just to frame what Dr. Issa said about that, And the other thing is with what Dr. Short just said about J.R. Valerie is that he massively sabotaged or tried to sabotage Fred Hampton Jr.'s Prisoners of Conscience Committee before Fred Hampton Jr. just realized something's really wrong with this guy, and fired him as Minister of Information for his group.
I mean, that was not the Short talking. That was what's the sister? What's your name again?
I'm sorry, me,
Hello?
John Potash, or Dr.
No, I
Short?
know something like that, but you said that she was Dr. You said somebody was Dr. Short, but you don't know.
Oh, I thought it was Randy Short. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I didn't know his name again. I'm sorry.
Wait, say your name again for us. Prison Conscience Committee.
Oh, that was J.R. Valerie. He's the government infiltrator of the Prisoners of Conscience Committee.
No, I ain't talking about the person who made the reference about it, brought up Chauncey Bailey from 512. Can you state your name here, please?
Margaret.
Oh, hey,
Margaret.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that, Margaret.
Yeah,
I thought you were
Margaret.
Dr. Randy Short.
But you know what? I thought I had Chairman Fred on a couple weeks ago to talk about Malcolm Shabazz and also J.R. Valerie, Cleveland Valerie. And, he had wrote on his website, basically, did a damning, I guess, psychological profile of J.R. Valerie and also offering evidence of him, quote-unquote, sabotaging certain key events within the organization as well as, just around the globe, I guess. But my understanding is that he has a family history of military intelligence involvement. Is that correct?
I don't know about that.
His father's a retired military.
Okay.
The Army Ranger, right?
Well, I think it's his grandfather was a highly decorated retired military officer, but I think we're getting too much into math.
I agree.
You can't look at these situations. You can't understand these situations without really understanding the core of where this is coming from. It's coming from the United States federal government. It has always been an issue since the first day Africans were forcibly brought to this country. That has always been an issue, even during the days of enslavement, in which I like to call a dictatorship, a totalitarian dictatorship, where Africans were forced to labor for the white elite. But during that period of so-called enslavement, you also had more than 300 registered armed resistance movements. And many of those registered armed resistance movements were geared toward a change of government. Many of them. So a lot of people like to call slave uprisings or slave rebellions. No, I don't call them slave rebellions, because to rebel, you must be a part of a government. African people were not a part of the government. So they were armed resistance movement or armed liberation movements for national sovereignty. I think the largest one was in New Orleans in 1811. We all know about Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey. Well, those were just a few, but there were 300 of them that were recorded. 300 of them. Some of them were almost successful in overturning the government. We know what happened in Haiti with the Haitian Revolution. And so what we're looking at is a group of people who now categorize themselves as African Americans, although they don't have the same status as other so-called Americans, right? And they have a different outlook at how the government treats them, and the government has a different outlook in how they are perceived by the so-called laws of the government. And I think no one dealt with this more adequately than Malcolm Shabazz's grandfather, Malcolm X, right? So what we're looking at is a group of people who are now called African Americans, who at any time they decide to do something as it regards this government, they have just cause because of the harsh treatment that the government deals them, right? And I think we need to put this in that framework. We have a group of people who are by law are citizens, but are not treated as citizens. The law tends not to work with them, mostly because of their history of how they got here. They got here as prisoners of war from Africa. War was waged against them. Malcolm X's great-great-grandfather was a Bambara, taken from the Senegambia area, brought into what is now known as Georgia, and enslaved under some of the worst humane conditions that the world has ever seen. Right? And so you're looking at 400 years of resistance toward this dictatorship and 400 years of constant repression by the European elite out of fear that there may be a Haitian revolution or something to that effect. They know, and we don't have to kid ourselves. I have a PhD in U.S. history, so this is not a secret. I worked at the United States National Archives and Records Administration, so what I'm about to say is not a real secret. They know that black people are not really a part of this system. And they know at any time, because black people have just cause, or African people in the United States have just cause, that any time African people can and will rise up because of the harsh, inhumane treatment that is directed toward them by the government that is supposed to protect them. But since they are not citizens and never have been true citizens, I would like to say probably quasi-citizens, and we know that by looking at the 13th Amendment, which only abolished, well, we really never abolished slavery if you look at it, and if people actually read it, it just transferred slavery from the hands of the individual white male to the government. That's what the 13th Amendment did. The federal government took over slavery. And it says slavery, involuntary slavery will be forever ended except if, what? You're convicted of what? A crime. So they never ended it. It was transferred. So this is why we have all these Africans in prison in the state of Delaware where I live. 75% of all the people incarcerated are black men. And this is the case all over the country. This is what Malcolm Shabazz was shedding light on, right before he was killed. I think that Press TV piece that he did, where he was talking about the mass incarceration and bringing international light to that the United States government still enslaves a large portion of its so-called citizens. Why do they do this? Because African people are the enemy. You're the enemy. Unless you pledge allegiance to white supremacy and the annihilation of your group, you are an enemy, period. You are subject of war. That's our history in this country. You can't say it any clearer than that.
Professor Issa, I would agree with that in terms of race, except the fact of the Kennedys, the assassination of the Kennedys. I would add that it's partly, I think it's partly race, but also partly going against the hyper-capitalist and white supremacist nature of the U.S. government and the oligarchy that rules this country. So when the Kennedys went against that, of course, Robert F. Kennedy, according to someone close to him, had asked Martin Luther King to be his vice president. John F. Kennedy was, actually starting to become a leftist and push for some civil rights legislation and ending the Vietnam War. And so because of that, because they went against the hyper-capitalist agenda, they were also, assassinated and done in. But generally speaking, it's both racist and, anti-leftist, I think, that agenda. And that's why they've killed so many, great black leaders, from Malcolm X down to his grandson, Malcolm Shabazz, and, of course, the Shakur family. They've killed many of the Shakur family, particularly Tupac.
And they will kill more. They're going to kill more. They have to.
And of course,
They have
of course,
to do
they're
this
trying to take their sources of education out, and that's why they tried to take you out, Dr. Issa, for what you were doing at Delaware State University, doing great work there.
Yes. Well, it's all about education. I mean, how a person is educated determines how they will react. And so by taking out the educational process in which African people in this country are trained, then they're not able to adequately fight white supremacy. So they become the subject of white supremacy without the skills to fight it. Education is supposed to show you how to fight, how to survive, not just how to get a job, how to survive. So if we look at the education of Earl Little, if we look at the education of Malcolm X, if we look at the education of Malcolm Shabazz, they were trained to fight white supremacy. So by taking them out, you take out a very important elite class who were willing to fight for their people. Basic human rights. These are basic human rights that no state or no nation has control of. These are rights that are endowed to you by the universal God that you say that you represent or that you believe in. So even with the issue, when we look at the Kennedys and the assassinations of the Kennedys, they were going up against they were going up against, as you did state, these oligarchies and the military complex. And then it was an age, a different age, where this nation was in a different transition. It was moving in a way that was more populist. And the Kennedys were being pulled into that because that was the movement of the people in the country at that time. And so they didn't need a group of elites who were not going to follow the status quo, so they had to take them out. Mm-hmm. But as it regards African people, Europeans, Irish, the Jewish, or any other group, they assimilate to what we call whiteness. Whiteness, they assimilate to this. African people can't assimilate to whiteness. So therefore, we are constant enemies of the state on every level.
That's well said. And also I want to put in the conversation a brother that's very honorable indeed, another academic who's fighting a good fight for the people, a true people's advocate, a public intellectual extraordinaire in his own right, is Dr. Randy Short. Are you there, brother, Dr. Randy Short?
Yes, I'm here. How are you?
Man, it's an honor to have you on, man. So we talked about your good friend Malcolm Shabazz. You did a lot with brother Malcolm Shabazz. Y'all real close.
Can I do one thing?
Go ahead.
Let me greet Dr. Issa. As soon as I'm off the phone, I need to call you. I know it's been crazed on my end, but I'll call you as soon as the show is over.
No problem, bro.
All right. Malcolm, what I can say, Dr. Issa mentioned it earlier, there's no doubt in my mind that this whole thing surrounding Malcolm remains a conspiracy against the family, against us as a people. If you look at the way that this has been treated, if it's treated at all, I can even give you an example that I'm involved in. If you look at any treatment of the memorial service that was done for Malcolm Shabazz, Dr. Issa got to the last part. He didn't see me speak. But I mentioned the significance of Malcolm, and not one paper has acknowledged that I was even there. Not one thing that I said was mentioned. I wasn't mentioned being there, and yet if Dr. Issa, who's there, people kept saying thank you for what you said. He was there watching it. We appreciate what... I'm thinking, that's interesting that the people were moved, but not one thing I mentioned about the significance of this man was repeated. Nothing. They had Al Sharpton's daughter. They named all the people that were there. But nothing I said about what Malcolm was doing mentioned. Not one thing was mentioned. And so why the blackout? Why he's going on 29? Why is someone trying to talk about him as a 12-year-old who had been targeted in his most formative years by the government? We're more interested in what the government caused Malcolm to do as a 12-year-old than when he, as a man working through the issues that they put on him, was aspiring to do. Okay? Why no interest? You know, that would be like me talking about Ronald Reagan when his father was a drunk and ignoring everything else that he did. Or talking about Teddy Kennedy when he killed Mary Jo Kopechne at Chappaquiddick. You never talk about white people based on their foibles when they're younger, especially when they're children. Why this fascination with Malcolm X's, the grandfather and the grandson, what they used to do wrong instead of what they were doing that was right? They must have been really doing something when you see the blackout. So I just want that clear. Malcolm was beginning, and in fact, let's just say this, because it hasn't been said. Malcolm Shabazz threatened internationally, but in particular in the United States, an emergence of Shiism being a contender for the hearts and minds of people who might become Muslims within the United States, Great Britain, and Canada. That was a threat. No ifs, buts, and ands about it. And that's why you don't hear a frigging peep from a whole lot of Muslims, because the Saudis, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, all of the Gulf Cooperation Council people, they fund Islam worldwide to be the reactionary, racist, anti-female, Sunni, Salafi, Takfiri type of Islam that you see everywhere, where folks got the dyed beards and they act mean and they're so harsh. That's not the way a lot of Muslims are in Africa. Dr. Issa's been to Africa. You know how cool African Muslims are? Why is it so strange in America? It's the Saudi money. Everyone knows the Saudis work for the CIA and the Saudis work for the Mossad. And the Saudis are Israel's best ally in the region, after Turkey and Egypt. But the Brotherhood is controlled by the CIA and Mossad and MI5, MI6. Do you understand what I'm saying? Someone like Malcolm coming along, for all of what people could say about him that wasn't productive, the grandson of Malcolm X getting his act together might lead a hejra out of Sunni Islam and into Shia Islam in the United States at a high point of tension between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it gets better if I say to you that unlike most people, Malcolm Shabazz studied Shia Islam in Syria that's presently being destroyed by the United States and its allies. Some 90,000 people killed, over 2 million displaced. That was Malcolm's favorite country.
That's very interesting.
What would he have said if you had put a microphone in his face about Syria?
Yeah.
I mean, there are billions of dollars. Syria's the linchpin. The Israel wants it gone because Israel's under threat. Henry Kissinger and others are saying Israel may not last another 50 years the way they're going. Taking out Syria is almost like I'm using a crude term, it's like a penis ring for Zionism. A retainer, something to keep it standing when it's going to fall down anyway.
Well, I think the U.S. wants Syria gone like they wanted Libya gone, and that's why they bombarded Libya.
Who are the biggest people pushing to attack Libya? If you look at Senator McCain and you look at the others, they're the biggest AIPAC supporter types up there. You know, we run from this, and I don't know the ethnicity of the speaker, but we can't ignore the problem that international Zionism is causing globally. It is a problem, and people are paying for it. part of what happened to the civil rights movement. In fact, no one talked about it here, but I'm going to bring this up right now. June 8th represents the anniversary, the 45th anniversary, if I'm correct, of the USS Liberty. No, it's 46th anniversary of people, all these Americans, some 30-plus Americans and hundreds wounded on the USS Liberty, where Israel murdered U.S. servicemen for the hell of it as a means to get the United States to attack Egypt in 1967. This government threatened the lives of its own service people, that they can't tell that they were being mowed down by Israeli planes that our government probably paid for them to have. This is long before 9/11. There's a whole lot that we're not being honest about. And there's a whole lot on the table. And there are a whole lot of folks getting rich. And there are a whole lot of folks that are neocons. And if you start looking at who does the policy, and don't blame me, there's a guy named Brother Nathaniel who lays it out very, very carefully every week. Brother Nathaniel. Just Google him. And he lays it down. There's something very bizarre happening in the world, and nobody wants to say what it is, because if we acknowledge a problem, that makes you a racist. It makes you an anti-Semite for even seeing something happen when it happens. Okay, so I'm not going to play that game, and I'm as Jewish and via slavery, by the way, as anybody else. And so I'll just put it out there. There is a problem with the stranglehold that AIPAC and the Conservative Friends of Israel have. That's over in Great Britain. The British Parliament is dominated by the CFI, and the French, it's ran by CRISP, the Conseil Représentatif pour les Instituts Juifs, something. It's CRISP, is all of these countries doing all this fighting, okay? And Sarkozy, by the way, was Jewish. Nobody says that. He's the main person after Gaddafi. We don't say that. We don't call things what they are. Let a black person kill someone, they'll tell you his ethnicity. Let someone be Zionist or something like that, like the man that sent the ricin to kill Obama, and the story disappeared because he's Jewish. Fair is fair. Some people have gotten out of control with the power and money and influence that they have internationally, and I don't think they care much about the rest of humanity as long as they get their way. And anyone that says anything about it hates people, even if you can prove everything that you're saying is based on research, details, facts, and information. And in particular, don't read the American press. Read the Israeli press. So the next time someone calls me a name, don't blame me for reading the Israeli press and seeing what they say about what's happening in the Middle East and who they attribute blame to. Okay, so we need to be real about that. It is a challenge, which is why we can't have real news. Who are the people fighting against guns? Who are the people pushing homeland security? Everywhere you'll look, you'll keep finding Zionists there, well-placed. Who funds the politicians? That's no banality. That's no hidden point. And it is a challenge, and it's difficult for people to hear. So we've got folks where we're crying for things that happened in Europe 70 years ago, and yet we can't deal with stuff that happens right now because something happened 70 years ago.
Dr. Randy, I think that was great, and he laid out so many different things for us to consider. I'm glad that we're doing this show. And I want to apologize on behalf of people that are searching for truth that you were not recognized, and your contribution was not recognized at the memorial service in Harlem that happened for Brother Malcolm Shabazz. But also I want to think about what you said, too, about him converting to Shia Islam. And I think it's fascinating because people got to understand this, that his grandfather was Sunni, correct? I'm correct in saying that, correct? He was Sunni Islam?
War. That's right.
And then the grandson is Shia, and then Iran loved Malcolm, the grandfather. They loved him. So to have the grandson be Shia and then to have his grandfather be Sunni, I mean, he was a young black man that was very articulate. I look at all of the press TV interview he did and all his other interviews, he was very charismatic. You hear echoes of Malcolm Sr., Malcolm, his grandfather, in him. You hear the potential in him. I saw the interview you did with him on the University of Maryland campus. They had to take this brother out. He was too much of a threat. Correct? I mean, if they trying to neutralize certain people like they always done, he had to be taken out. So it begs the question, why was it that the Amsterdam News was the one that broke the story about him being killed?
They broke the news because someone sent it to them. I believe Terry Williams.
Terry Williams, but I'm saying normally, a person like that, he's the grandson of Malcolm X, and he got killed in an international play. He didn't get killed over here. It's like A.P.O. Rudolph or somebody would broke that story before them. And the fact they got the location wrong is kind of disturbing, too.
Well, remember something.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that it was confirmed to them from the U.S. Embassy, all right?
Right.
Which means the U.S. Embassy knew where he was because they got the information. How could they tell the family that he was in Mexico City and Tijuana at the same time? Somebody got it wrong.
Mm.
Someone got it wrong, and why would reporters report a city where they hadn't checked? How did this story of Tijuana come out? I was saying Tijuana because that's what was confirmed.
Can I just say something, Ron?
Yeah, go ahead. Say something.
Yeah. I think that Israel gets $5 billion a year from the United States, and the United States has been attacking black leaders for 200-300 years. So I just don't agree with the idea that it's only Zionism that's attacking black leaders. I think it's the U.S. oligarchy.
I never said Zionism attacked black leaders. I never said that at all. I just want
to point that out. That I think that the key.
You feel defensive about it because I brought the issue up.
No, I just disagree.
Go ahead, let Brother John finish, though, Dr. Rainer. Let him say what he got to say.
So I just think that I think that Israel is U.S.'s pit bull, and they set them on anyone they want them to set them on. So the U.S.'s involvement in Central America, for example, is not Zionism. It's fascism. It's U.S. intelligence fascism. It's the U.S. oligarchy that is, there could be some Jews involved, but I think it's, notoriously been white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. The Rockefellers, the Harrimans, the J.P. Morgans, the Carnegies, and they set in motion the eugenics movement in the early 1900s, which was attacking anyone who wasn't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, of course, particularly blacks. But they also used that eugenics money, that eugenics movement, to fund Hitler and the Nazis. And that is continued today, that kind of fascism. They brought in the Nazis, thousands of Nazis, into U.S. intelligence. And they also use, the Zionists and Israel as their attack dog. And they attack other countries, of course. They're attacking the Palestinians, and they're using Mossad around the world in the same way they use, French intelligence and other intelligence groups. But those Nazis, that is the core of what I think U.S., and U.S. intelligence is.
Well, you can't have Nazism without having Hitler. Hitler is of North African origin, that his DNA, and I need to go no further than what I meant about that, and Hitler's own effort to change his own family history because of what Hitler knew about his family. So you can't have Nazism without what Sander Gilman calls Jewish self-hatred. That's just there. You wouldn't have had a Nazi Germany without the funding of the Wahlberg brothers, who knew all about Hitler and happened to be Jewish.
I hear you, but I think it was majority Rockefeller, Harriman, J.P. Morgan, and those people's money, according to some of the top.
I didn't say the majority. I never said most. I simply said in the mix.
Okay, sure.
People get defensive but the point is, the reason I'm mentioning it being in the mix is when folks claim to be victims and you play on both sides, we talk about black sellouts, Okay, Malcolm would be here today if there were not black collaborators. Mm-hmm. Since the 1940s, if not before, the people, you wouldn't have an America without Hem Solomon, who was son-in-law of the largest slave trader in the United States. Okay, we can go on and on. I'm not going to waste time on it. And I will go on when we start talking about racism and slavery and colonialism. It's inextricable with the immigration of affluent English, Dutch, and other people who happen, and Spanish and Portuguese, who happen to be Jewish. No, they're not the only people, but they've definitely been strong in the mix. In fact, I'm trying to think if Mark Felt, who's Jewish, Deep Throat, was the person behind the COINTEL program, since you mentioned black leaders and all of that. See, I didn't bring it up, but since you do, I'm going to find that. Because when people have a history, wherever they go, of aligning themselves with the power elite, without any regard to the masses of people, they end up being identified with the elite. This is, there's a book by Goldstein called The Fatal Embrace. Go look it up. When people side with the power forces for group advancement at the expense of other people, they get identified. So one only needs to look at the Obama cabinet. I dare you to look. I dare you to do a demographic study of the current president, cabinet, and all the appointees. And you're going to have to say, if this reflected American society demographically, what would the largest group be? So who's doing the policy? Who's running the Federal Reserve? Who runs the Treasury? Who's there? You'll keep seeing a strong, it's true that WASP run the society, but who works with the WASP to do it to the rest of the folks? And that's the problem that I'm making a point. In fact, why would anyone with any knowledge of a Hitler or a Holocaust or an Inquisition not be the most progressive, fair-minded people versus saying, dude, I'm going to get mine no matter what happens to anyone else, and no one can notice me because of past conditions of persecution. It holds no water with, I look at it straight like it is. So when Gaddafi, there was something that happened before Gaddafi got killed. Gaddafi did something that people didn't agree with. There was an offer made to Gaddafi to open up bases. Some talk with a group of people came over from Israel, and Gaddafi refused, and that's when the bombing started. Before Hugo Chavez got sick, go look it up, find out which community of Venezuelans he met with, and then suddenly he was sick. No, I'm not saying that it necessarily was done by, but it's interesting. What's the community of Cubans that had a stranglehold, or at least a disproportionate amount of wealth and power in Cuba, and why Cuba's so hated? If you start looking, you're going to start finding similar things pop up again and again. And by the way, there's no course in any university that teaches this, nothing like that. No school would be funded. If you start looking, you keep seeing the pattern, it is what it is. And just because it's offensive to people, for folks to be able to use this education Dr. Issa's talking about people need to have to function, if I see you doing wrong, I don't care who you are, I'm going to call you on it.
Sure.
This is not what happens in America. This is not what's being done, because if someone says, okay, Wall Street, what were the first banks to collapse before, this? Who was running them? What banks went down first? Unfortunately, they weren't the Anglo banks. Yes, the WASP control most, but I'll tell you, WASP do not outnumber, or should I say WASP do outnumber certain people, but a third of the billionaires, third of the millionaires, for such a small percentage, that's wealth and power. It can't be denied. And if someone's offended that one notices wealth and power. Too bad. If one notices that there's one black senator in this country, just one, and yet blacks are 14, 15% of the population. Take this group that we can't talk about. They're 2%. How many senators do they have? It's the power. This can't be ignored. And in fact, Malcolm X was attacked by constantly. The New York Times, owned by, at one point, Salzburger, not a WASP name, okay?
Yeah, but he was constantly attacked by a lot of newspapers around the country, and the majority of them were bought out by Rockefeller and Harriman and the J.P. Morgan, moneyed interest.
If you look at who owns the newspapers right now, whether you feel defensive or not.
No, I don't feel defensive. I just think I'm just trying to clarify all the facts.
It's not Anglos. It's not Anglos. It's not Anglos that have Hollywood.
They share boards of directors with the top multinational corporations. So it's really the banks and the defense contractors, the oil companies, and the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies that all control the newspapers because of the interlocks of boards of directors of all these companies.
Right. However,
so they're controlled by the multinational corporations in general.
Yeah, the multinational corporations in general. I never knocked that, but I'm still dealing with this because when I look at the oppression of my people specifically, okay, all I need to do is walk through the neighborhood and find out who owns the liquor stores. I mean, just ask. You down in Memphis, right, Herd? Just ask.
Yeah.
It'll keep coming up over and over again. Don't tell me about Anglos.
But I think there was a major Holocaust in the history, and that's the Holocaust against blacks. And then there was a minor Holocaust in world history, and that was the Holocaust against Jews. And so, if the powers that be want to divide and conquer, they can easily just say it's the Jews against the blacks versus it's the Anglos that have the most power, that are directing both Holocausts.
It's greedy people. It's greedy people, no matter what they look like,
right.
No matter where they're from, that contribute to this problem. However, you have to measure greed by attainment. So I will give it to you, the European multinationals and the rich banking families, but if we talk about banking families, we have to talk about Rothschilds. No, that's not the average person that's teaching music in the school. I'm not stupid. But, hey, it's there. And it can't be blown off because it's unpleasant.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. My take on history is that they rose up against the Swiss banking families, which had the BCCI and all the other banks. That was the Rockefeller's banks and the other banks that they were associated with. And those Swiss banks were the largest banks in the world. The Rothschilds bank was the first non-Anglo to rival those Swiss banks. And so they aren't, the Rothschilds weren't the only biggest bankers. The Swiss banks had the most money and power, and the Rothschilds was the first to rival them, though.
I'm not just one-upman. I'm just trying to make a point.
Yeah.
That the money that began to be made by a specific community coincides with what happened to the Native American and the African. And people can run from it, they can duck it, they can tap dance around it, but it doesn't get very far. Wall Street, the financial heart of this country, if we want to talk about the dominant power on early Wall Street, later the WASP got it when they took over New Amsterdam, but the origin of Wall Street, where it became powerful, it's clearly, you can't be denied. If you know New York history, you don't have to even know any. All you need to do is know New York history and know about what's his name, Stuyvesant and Peter Stuyvesant and the others, and it's very, 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 very clear.
Well, I think
I'll go further. There could be no Confederacy of the United States without Judah P. Benjamin. What kept the Confederacy fighting for black slavery, whether this is liked or not, were British and French by the way, I won't say the ethnic group, supporting Judah P. Benjamin, whose face is on the money of the Confederacy. So so when you talk about our people and who's been most directly, what happened after slavery, who did blacks become indebted to, we can deal with the Lehman Brothers and the other people making their money off of being cotton dealers in Alabama. Some of the wealth that people made came from the specific targeting and super exploitation of people Anglos wouldn't even do business with. That's why I don't have to say Anglos. I can look at who was allowed to have the monopoly over this outcast group of people that nobody would trade with.
Yeah, Anglos wouldn't do business with them because they were prejudiced against them, and they had signs on restaurants that said no Jews or dogs. That not even they didn't have to say no blacks, but the point was that restaurants all over the country in the early 1900s didn't want Jews to be allowed in restaurants. So there was anti-Semitism was the lowercase prejudice, but the of course racism was the higher case prejudice, and so there just was that kind of anti-Semitism. Some in a major way
were able to become white, and part of the deal
sure they were
was putting
Italians
a dagger
too, all kinds of
but
and Irish Catholics obviously like the Kennedys,
but nobody, my friend, and you can run from it. When you look at Hollywood, which is clearly dominated by a specific group that made the racist movies and all this kind of stuff, the images that perpetuate blacks being subhuman, in particular, is literally the monopoly of a specific group that bosts a lot but doesn't like to be accountable when one brings up faults. That's when folks are defensive. Hollywood, you could run. Hollywood is Hollywood, and the hip hop, and the people who destroyed C. Dolores Tucker. I mean, I'm sorry. And this same entity funds the NAACP and all the groups that undermine our community being able to articulate our point of view. The same community is behind the homosexual movement, where homosexuality has become the blacks, and we can't even get killed or discriminated against anymore. And this doesn't happen anymore because. And to identify who funds it is offensive to those who are unwilling. And you see, I'm a Christian. It says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. That's my faith. It means everybody has people who screw up and everyone screws up. There are other faiths that say some people can't do wrong to others, okay? And it's a real challenge for us to be honest about the influence of what Talmudism is doing in this society, and we tend to be the biggest victims of it. No, I didn't say the Anglos aren't doing their part, and I'm not saying that they don't have all the power, but who specifically manages us? The middleman people. This is a concept of divide and rule, of creating middlemen people, whether they're Asian stores or other people in our community. And this is done by policy. And if I partake, like the Ukrainians did during the Holocaust, or like the Poles did during the Holocaust, that I am involved in destroying a people, even though I myself may be oppressed, I actively say, at least I'm not as far down as the other guy, so what happens to them is their problem. This is what I'm speaking to. And because of this, all of the global sympathy among human suffering functions with the group that's doing great, and yet the other people in the world suffering can't get a hearing in edgewise.
Oh, Dr. Randy Short, Brother John Potash, I really appreciate, all the stuff y'all putting out there, because it's stuff that people need to know about, and they can listen to it in the archives. And also, you got the internet at your disposal. But my concern is this, like we were talking about Malcolm Shabazz, and it's great that all this other stuff is coming out. But it's just simple. Let's make it plain here. If your grandfather was on a stamp, a U.S. postage stamp, why hasn't more attention been paid to the grandson being killed in the way he's been killed?
Sure.
Where is the timeline? You think about back in 97, not just, you think about what happened to Michael Kennedy. of the Kennedy clan. I mean, he was nobody. He wasn't a politician like that. He wasn't, he wasn't even JFK Jr., right? But he had all this media coverage about Michael Kennedy, the way he died in that skiing trip, right? All this media coverage, because he was a Kennedy. His last name mattered. His family history mattered. The legacy mattered, regardless if he was involved in politics or not. They still gave him the coverage, whereas Malcolm Shabazz has not even got any type of decent coverage in the quote-unquote establishment media. So that's a problem I have with that. The fact that the U.S. Embassy had it wrong.
Not going to get the coverage. Look, there's an effort, and I've sat in on one of the meetings. AIPAC wants a war with Iran. Okay? That's not what I think. I've sat in and heard them say it. Okay? Iran is target number one for American policy for certain people. Malcolm, and anyway being associated with Iran, means people who hate Iran are not going to give any attention to someone that was interested in going. So right there, you've got your answer as to why. And it's not honest if people are not willing to admit. In fact, just go online and ask, look at where the media is, which groups are dominant in media, and it'll come up, ding, 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 you'll keep getting 3 lemons across for practically all except for one major media conglomerate. That explains why. If people don't like someone and they don't like their friends, and if this is the same government and governments that are funding the murder of some 45,000 Shia in Syria in the last 2 years, then why is that a surprise? I mean, it's just not a surprise. Nothing is a surprise. Somebody has, Iran is no threat to the United States. Iran has no nukes. That keeps coming out. They don't have it. Yet we have the prime minister of one country come in and admit that, claim that they had nukes and then turn around 2 weeks later and say they didn't have it. It's Benjamin Netanyahu. By the way, it wasn't reported in the American press. He acknowledged that they didn't have it. It's amazing. The Israeli press is so honest. The Israeli press is, the Jerusalem Post, Haaretz, they're superior to anything that we have in this country because they can be critical amongst themselves in Israel, but you can't criticize or think critically in the United States, especially if you have family that did nothing during the Holocaust. So people have to be like at Mason's Temple for the Church of God in Christ. You know how folks shout the most heard and they speak in tongues the most because they want Bill Street getting drunk. Those people who did nothing to stop the Holocaust in the 40s, who live in America, are more fanatical than the very people on the front lines in Israel. And one has to ask why, and I'll tell you, it's guilt. To assimilate, people didn't speak up for the survival of their own. Now that that's happened, everybody has to pay to make up for the compensatory guilt that they let their own brothers and sisters die in Europe. And we, by the way, are asked to foot the bill for stuff we didn't do. I'm talking about black folks.
Right.
And I'm talking about South Africa. Who's the biggest company in South Africa? Anglo-American. Who owns Anglo-American? Oppenheimer. We could do this over and over again. No, I'm not saying that everything is owned, but in the case of people being the middleman, hegemonic force that controls our community, there it is. And if you can look at the NAACP right now, and I can tell you, Ben Jealous, he doesn't run the NAACP. Rabbi Saperstein does. I mean, it's just that simple. He's a pawn. Obama, who picked Obama? Chicago Jewish community picked Obama. Look at the names. I mean, that's no secret, and that's not a put down. More power to them. But if you have the power, be honest. When the policy is bad, it says something about you. Don't tell me about the Anglo. If you ran the man, you put him, you fund him, you bring him up, he does something wrong. Don't tell me about the Anglo. You do what you want. So he's yours. You build him up, you make him, he's yours.
But I'd like to hear Dr. Issa speak about this. But But, obviously the Jews didn't pick Bush, but Obama followed the lines of Bush and the Bush families. And
Bush.
What's that?
He's worse than Bush.
I agree he's worse than Bush, but I still think he's following the Bush line for sure. As bad as, and I think he can get away with more than Bush because it's under the liberal facade. It's under the cloak of liberalism, even though he's not liberal. He's actually doing things that maybe are worse than Bush, possibly.
In America, who are the liberals in America? If we're going to start citing them, when we use these terms, we never say who. Whenever I hear universalism, I know who it is. One doesn't
I just think we haven't let Dr. Issa speak at all. I just think we should give him a chance.
But I'm speaking, and Dr. Issa has let me talk, because Dr. Issa knows what's going on with him in Delaware. He's not. Hey, Dr. Issa, he's there. Who runs Delaware?
Look, it ain't no joke that I'm being prosecuted by two of the most powerful families in the state, and both of them are Jewish families. The first is the Markell family, who's the governor, and the second is I'm being prosecuted by the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, whose father happens to be the Vice President of the United States, and whose mother happens to be Jewish, and who his sister is married to a very wealthy Jewish family. But his mother's father was a well-known Jewish individual.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I like to put things into the global white supremacy order. Jews are Europeans, and they assimilate just like other groups of Europeans into white supremacy. And so, but I understand exactly what Randy is saying also.
And no one's said everybody or all. We're only saying the few that do, my God, we feel it. Mm-hmm. If we were doing it the same way when Farrakhan says something nasty, everyone in our community is called to denounce Farrakhan for his views. When our people are victimized, like when Zimmerman, who's Jewish, murders Trayvon Martin, the media lies. They call him half Latino. I said, well, what's the other half? Because they don't want to say that, when someone black kills someone Jewish, you hear about it. Jews can't kill blacks. Only they can only be victimized, but cannot do victimization.
Yeah, of course, that's crazy. That's ridiculous.
It's not fair. And
right,
we can have a real discussion on our issue, because our leadership can't move because it's dominated by another community. And whenever we try to do something, we end up being told you can't do it because someone else somewhere else said. And when we look somewhere else, we keep seeing the same thing. True, Anglos run the show, but who is the local district manager that implements the policy? This is the same situation in Russia where people did not like the Tsar.
Well, I think that's an appropriate way to put it, for sure.
The Russian boyar class that screwed most Russians were Russians. However, their tax collectors from the Pale happen to be something else. And when people rose up against the Tsar, they identified their most bitter enemy as the tax-collecting group. And this is what Mr. Goldstein talks about in his book, Fatal Embrace, as a warning. Hey, let us not do in this land what we've often done in other places that got us identified with a hated elite. This is what I'm saying. And that's hard to hear. If one identifies success at all costs, don't worry. Blacks are the same way. Dr. Dre and all these people, they're useless to us. But we can call them out. If I mention the situation in Chicago where all these kids are being killed and the police are just shooting folks in Chicago, not that it wasn't happening on the daily before, but now the mayor is Rahm Emanuel. Maybe it's worse. There's no criticism right now of Rahm Emanuel. You can't.
You got to criticize Rahm Emanuel. That's
problematic. Yeah, but that embodies what I'm saying to you, that sometimes The problem is first our own group. However, if I contribute or benefit from the sufferance of another group, I am part of their problem, which is why I mention liquor stores, or if I mention who put out the first gangster rap and the coon songs, I can go all the way back, and because I'm a historian of my people, and I can keep showing not that the overwhelming of any group, but a very powerful interest that has assimilated into being white and gets to play 2 or 3 games in terms of identity at one time. I'm not white, I'm white, I'm something else. And that's problematic because we're always black. We're always identified. And so how can one be in a relationship with a group that has no definition? It changes whenever they want. It can only mean, like all the other groups that blacks have worked with, who screwed us, and we have stupid leadership, so it's on us. We get screwed. So that's all. Now, on Malcolm Shabazz, I just want to say that the issue of Iran and Syria, Iran and Syria are part of it. The other part is the jails. The other part is young black people. The other part is people understand that it's time for a movement. It's movement time, and this is why Homeland Security has so many bullets. This is why they're doing all this thing on phones. They understand that this country's in real bad shape now, and tens of millions of people, 90 million people in this country need either more work or complete whole jobs. And it's not cool. They're looking at Turkey doing a meltdown. They're looking at Spain, Italy. All these places are having meltdowns as this system is collapsing. And it is a sideshow to talk about Syria, or for that matter, Iran. But if some people, if I had to quote Ariel Sharon that says Americans do whatever we tell them to do, something to that effect, well, my God, I don't know who is a dog wagging the tail or is the tail wagging the dog, but a partner. I can even say that the Stern Gang, which made a proposal to Hitler at the height of the Holocaust to enter into partnership with Hitler. Very curious history that we don't touch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book called The Transfer Agreement that documents how certain Jewish leaders sold out the protest movement against the Nazis and sold out, the majority of Jews to make the Holocaust happen. So that's true. I mean, that did happen. Sure.
When we talk about freedom and justice and self-determination, if someone makes it anti-Semitism, someone like Dr. Issa becomes a criminal for saying, I want to be able to teach my own people. He's put with German persecutors and ain't thinking about bothering anybody that has a yarmulke on. And this means that someone says, hey, look, if we keep the water cloudy, and it works for us, even though we know water is not necessarily good cloudy, then I'm a junior partner in an unfair system. True that you have to do something anyway, but at least acknowledge we're doing whatever the hell we have to do to get ours, no matter who we do it to. And if that's the case, nobody should be crying about victimhood. Someone say, you know what, I'm a player. When you go at the table and you shake the dice, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And it needs to be understood in the larger context of Islamophobia in this society. If we look at where that's being pushed from, People for the New American Century is a good example group. Just look at them. Look at Pearl and the other folks. You'll find a strong contingent that is chasing a movement that's really got this country where its Anglos are cooperating for their own reasons. And by the way, they're prepared. They are prepared. Yeah, but I want to finish what I'm saying. If no one comes back in, we'll stick on Malcolm. But I've got to say exactly, because don't ever think that I won't talk about what's real. Malcolm is a victim of the war on terror, in reality facilitates one state and one state alone. It's been terrible for the American people. So you must see Malcolm through the prism of the war on terror as well as a preceding war on blacks.
And that's why I'm talking about the investigation into Malcolm's murder.
There hasn't been an investigation beyond what the Mexican government put two guys in jail in a very short period of time. The family hasn't moved yet. They're probably collecting information. Their attorney, very busy for a couple of weeks, just returned to work this week. Now, some of us have been pressing the Mexican government that doesn't have pictures of Malcolm coming in the country. There's so many half-truths, so many lies, unless maybe you'll fund it, give us a lot of money to go down and check. And, in fact, this is sort of where we're stuck, is one has to almost wait until someone with authority to ask, or a group. And by the way, virtually no one has stepped forward, other than a handful of us, to simply ask questions of what happened. Why did it happen? Where did it happen? By the way, there has been all the evidence of that bar room or ball or wherever it was. That hasn't been, the cameras are turned off. The man who said he took Malcolm to the hospital, that's not true. Where is he? The other question is, why is the community in Oakland, the Muslim community in Oakland, so silent about it? Why hasn't traditionally radical, outspoken Oakland come out hard for Malcolm? Why? Why hasn't the man's Islamic imam, who says to be a nice guy, I don't know what they're doing. So there's almost a stand down over this. Its silence is more interesting than what we would find out. And if you look at no official group, not even the President of the United States, which I didn't expect, has said anything about this. When I see this kind of silence, someone's paid to take a fall. Who's paying? Are the Saudis paying? Who paid for there to be no noise? Why is there such silence? So in order to have an investigation, first of all, you have to have principals agree that they're going to do it. The United States government, the FBI, hasn't done anything, and they know all about it. Why not? And did Malcolm, was he in Mexico at the same time as Obama? Obama was in Mexico just about the same time Malcolm was there. It's interesting that no timeline has been given. Did he get in on the 3rd, or did he get in on the 29th? When did he get there? And when was Obama in Mexico, and who did he see, and who did he talk to? This is an interesting question for me. Why is that timeline? Why aren't there photos? How come the Associated Press, which has interviewed large numbers of people, hasn't really done a story? What happened to it? What happened to the stories I interviewed for? Where are they? Why haven't people questioned the brother who's friends with the two Mexican guys? How come Cleveland Del Rey Jr. hasn't been questioned? How come Suarez
when you
hasn't
say
been
people, what do you mean by people? Because I'll tell you one thing. It's all like everybody's, a lot of people are trying to do their own independent investigations. They're trying to connect with others.
They're trying to do that
and there has been information that's been released. Also, people are coming at hard on Cleveland, a.k.a. JR, a.k.a. Jay Short but Funky. Jay, you can contact him on Facebook. He disconnected his phone, but you can contact him on Facebook, and he does read those messages. And
he's not going to talk to me because I'm the person that first started asking questions. What does he know? How long has he known it? And the answers that we got was he didn't know he was in Mexico. He put that on Facebook. He didn't know why he was there, and yet he did cover stories on him going to Mexico. So I'm thinking, wow, this is real interesting. You mean you do a cover story?
Rumek wrote their own article for the Bayview that you see on the Bayview newspaper about Rumek with the photo of Miguel Perez and Juan Ruiz and Malcolm Shabazz, who's pictured in the middle. Rumek wrote that article and submitted it to
So he works. They say Rumek wrote the article. They say Rumek. What about the article that was written earlier by him about Rumek and how great they were and all the work they were doing? So
who also needs to be questioned is Mary Ratcliffe, who is the editor of Bayview. Mary Ratcliffe is the one who also needs to be questioned, as well as J.R., because J.R. works for Bayview. Those two both need to be interviewed and questioned in regards to Malcolm.
Well,
because they both had interesting things to say.
Not just her. What about Erica Huggins, and what about Elaine Brown?
What about McKinney?
Erica Huggins was on the Ford. She was on the Ford for the book that they had featured that was to be pre-ordered. That they have since removed due to negative feedback, public outcry in regards to them allegedly trying to profit off Malcolm's death. And Erica Huggins has an interesting history herself, having been connected with the murder of a Black Panther named Alex Rackley. And you can hear her on YouTube under Alex Rackley Confessions. And so it just makes the whole circumstance look very mired in.
But that Rackley case was set up by George Sands, who is highly implicated as a government agent. He went from office to office all over the country trying to set up things and, create chaos. And the FBI came in right after him and tried to, invaded offices and ransacked offices and arrested people. And that whole incident with Rackley was, I think, setting up, Erica Huggins, who set up the Panther office in New Haven. So I just wouldn't hold it against Erica Huggins for that incident.
Yeah, well, the tape has just been released less than 2 years ago. It's called Alex Rackley Confesses. Erica has told people personally, even told myself, that she tried to stop the murder. But on the tape, it has her recording. You hear her voice. Not a lot of people know about this tape because it was just released less than 2 years ago, where she says, she coldly says that bragged about torturing Alex and being involved in this murder.
Well, yeah, but just
someone who
said
that she was not involved, that she tried to stop it, and she's and so you listen.
Well, I hear you, and that's too bad. It's a shame for sure. But her husband, John Huggins, was murdered in Los Angeles. He was the head of the Los Angeles Black Panthers.
UCLA, but we're talking about Erica.
But Elaine Brown was a good person to bring up because Elaine Brown, has tried to sue Kathleen Cleaver and Geronimo Pratt for saying she was a government agent, and they have all kinds of evidence that they showed that says she was a government agent, and they won in court on that, but she's still appealing it, and she's trying to take it far. And everyone knows Geronimo Pratt was an excellent Black Panther, LA Panther leader, and Kathleen Cleaver also national Black Panther spokeswoman. So I just think that with Erica Huggins, she went through so much trauma with her husband getting killed and everything that was going on, and attacks on her and attacks on Bobby Seale when he was staying at the New Haven office at that time. And I think that was part of that whole setup there, was to also attack Bobby Seale, National Panther co-founder. That I don't know if we should think that Erica Huggins was so bad because she lied about a tape that they came out with on that Rackley situation.
She lied about the murder. She said she wasn't involved in the murder, but bragged about her torturing and murdering Alex Rackley. Okay, so
that's terrible if she did that. Of course, don't get me wrong.
So look it up on YouTube. It's Alex Rackley Confesses, Rackley Confesses, and you can hear her talk about bragging about the torture and murder of Alex.
That's too bad.
And she wrote the forward for.
She wrote the forward
for Malcolm Shabazz. Shabazz's book.
Yes, she wrote the forward, and you have to understand that Erica is tight with Elaine Brown.
Is she? I didn't know that. I'm sorry to hear that.
So, at least they're friends. She believes in forgiveness. So if you're friends to someone who had something to do with two Panthers being killed in UCLA, and you had something to do with Geronimo Pratt being in jail way longer than what he could have been, even with the unfairness, you're an interesting person. these are interesting people.
Lane Brown sure is.
There are all these activists in Oakland and in California who haven't really gone that far out the way from Malcolm. I'll tell you part of it. Part of it is people who are leftists don't want to touch it because they want to support immigration reform no matter how many blacks get killed in prison by the Mexican mafia or get killed in Compton or whatever when they're ethnically cleansed. So there's this fake black and brown unity, which doesn't exist, and it's not going to do anything for us because we know that Mexico doesn't even count blacks in its census, and blacks are oppressed there, and they know their place. So, we have folks running around doing this utopian thing. Suddenly, if you're not white, you're okay. I don't buy that. There are a lot of black people from here that aren't okay. You mean you just take anyone that shows up, oh, you're not white, I like you? That's stupid. That kind of ethnocentrism does not get us anywhere. So people who are supporting the president's immigration reform efforts don't want to talk about this, even though the people being deported from this country are disproportionately Africans and Caribbeans, especially under Obama. So, it's, to me, the people who are silent, it's because they don't want to mess with the president or the Democratic Party. There are these interests that has everybody silent. Let sleeping dogs lie. Oh, well, he burnt Betty Shabazz when he was young. And they acted as a 12-year-old boy was a 25-year-old man on a mission. And they ignore the fact, and it's a fundamental, basic fact about anyone, that most of what forms a child's identity and his future years happen in his first 6 years. Well, before Malcolm was 6, he was a target of COINTELPRO. Before he was 6. He's in the middle of this whole thing with Agent Fitzgerald to set his mother up to try to kill Louis Farrakhan. Had anything like that happened, his whole family would have been killed. So Malcolm was targeted long before, but that story isn't discussed. Because if it was, it almost makes a troubled youth. Well, wouldn't you be troubled if the state were after you as a baby? It's like hating baby Jesus because Herod wanted him dead. How dare you make Herod angry? Well, you should have changed your diapers. Maybe you wouldn't have killed all the other babies. We're very illogical, very irrational people. African Americans are so confused these days. I'm like, wow. I don't know if we're ever going to come back from the abyss where we are, because we are not thinking critically. How come Radio 1 isn't talking about this? And then again, I have to wonder who's the advertising base for Radio 1. And for black newspapers, there's a little bit, but not much. We don't probe and do much anymore. You're more likely to get on this blog show, and because of that, they're after the Internet now. They don't want people thinking or talking, and the mainstream media has said very little. Now, in terms of the family, I believe that I don't know if there's going to be a period where the mourning ends, but this whole thing would be greatly facilitated by some action, even if people were asked to get involved. You see, when a person is killed, if they don't hear a lot from the family, it might come across that what's said bad about him is true. And I don't think that's the intent of the family at all. But maybe they're trying to gather themselves. Imagine if your father's name is Malcolm and your nephew's name is Malcolm and they both die in very brutal deaths. It's probably very, very traumatic for this family. So, but this is what at some point has to happen. They have to reach out and ask and tell folks, we would like you to do this or that to help us get justice. I hope that comes soon, because they would give the moral shoulder to push out where the questions are. What happened? What really happened? Was he even in Mexico? Was the body moved? How come all the whores haven't been deposed that were supposedly running around? I mean, there's so many stories, and it doesn't make any sense. And I believe that is like Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA planted stories in papers to create confusion and disinformation. Why have all these stories been held up? Why?
Yeah, I mean, the CIA, even admitted having the Senate Church Committee found that the CIA had well over 400 members of the media living dual lives, and they worked for the CIA, and those were actually the owners of virtually all the media. And so, they can do whatever they want in the media, the CIA.
And so
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
No,
I was going to say, I'm sorry
like,
that I've got to exit this interview in a few minutes, but I really appreciate you having me on.
I was going to have you on, Brother John Potash, man. I mean, I was on it. It ran over time, but this information needed to be recorded and get out there. So I appreciate you contributing, as always.
Well, thanks so much. It was really good talking to you guys.
Especially,
good talking to you again, Dr. Issa and Dr. Short and Margaret and Ron. All right, take care now, you guys. Bye-bye.
Peace. Yeah, I want to wrap it up. I think it's important because we could go all day. I mean, y'all are definitely passionate and make great, brilliant points. And one thing about what Dr. Randy Short said a while ago, it's like a while ago, but not really. But like he talked about the compromise of black leadership. You think about the NAACP. The NAACP didn't have its first black president until Benjamin Hooks from Memphis. But like the thing about it, up to that point, they were all Jewish people or white people, whatever you want to call them. So this is the problem. This is the issue. So we have no entity where we could really address what's wrong with black America. There's no place that black Americans can go to talk about or deal with the ills of police brutality, unemployment, things of that nature. We have no government entity that really represents the interests of black people. And that's an issue that we need to deal with. Go ahead.
I'd like to add a few things. And when Malcolm Shabazz was in Libya, were you there with him, Brother Randy?
Yes, I was there.
Okay. Now, there's one picture with Malcolm Shabazz and one of Minister Farrakhan's sons. I'm not sure which son it is. I don't know if it's which son it is. Actually, Mustafa, do you know which son it was?
No.
All right.
When I was in Libya, I wasn't around Malcolm that much.
Okay, yeah.
I was around Malcolm some. But Malcolm...
Well, I wanted to bring up another point. All right, I was bringing that up because in my article I'm addressing this issue of why the newspaper will throw out this crazy number of $1,200, a $1,200 tab. Allegedly from a bar drinking, $1,200 in pesos. I mean, come on, you probably can get one beer for 3 pesos, and $1, I don't know what $1 is equivalent to pesos. So it's an enormous amount. I'm sorry?
It's like what they had been asked for was 20,000 pesos. 20,000 pesos is $1,657.
But in the media, they keep putting out. I understand. But in the media, they keep putting out the number $1,200.
Yeah.
So what I
if you do a straight conversion,
what I do is understand, because I know these people, because my first trial that I had for my case, it was on December the 4th, right, for my hearing in Delaware. And at the time, I didn't understand. I'm thinking, okay, December the 4th, what's the issue? But when I told my aunt, who's a former Black Panther Party member who lived in Chicago, she said, oh, my God, December the 4th, that's the day they murdered the chairman. And I said, what chairman? Fred Hampton, right? And so when she said that, I said, wow. She's very careful. In fact, you have people to be around you that entire day. right? Don't leave the house by yourself, and I'm going to make some calls, right? So these people, they deal with dates a lot. So I said, 1,200, what's important about 1,200? We know that is virtually impossible. Anybody who's traveled out of this country into a third world country know that you can't build up a tab of $1,200. It's impossible, right? And so I'm just not at a drinking spot. And so I just started to play around the number 1,200. And the number 1,200 appears, it has a direct relationship to the Nation of Islam. Now, I'm not into conspiracies, right? Conspiracy theories. I like to analyze everything and put it through a scientific test. 1,200. That's the main calling number for the Nation of Islam Mosque in New York City. Right? I think it's something 1,200. Right? But also, it is also the address of the main mosque in Chicago, 1,247th Street. Right? So, what now? What does this have to do with anything? Why would it? And then today, someone told me, well, you really may want, and I haven't told this to anyone. I haven't talked about this. It's in my article, though. And I said, okay, well,
look forward to reading that.
And so someone said, well, maybe you really need to look at who's in the Nation of Islam that has relationships in Mexico. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? So one of Farrakhan's, one of Elijah Muhammad's sons, lived in what they call the Hollywood of Mexico. He owns a house there. I'm assuming it has something to do with Elijah Muhammad. He's now the special assistant to Minister Louis Farrakhan. And he speaks fluent Spanish, and he's married to a Mexican woman. And he lives in Chicago. So I'm not putting any of this together. What I'm saying is just, it's a lot there. It's a whole lot there that you just don't understand what's going on. All of these so-called leads could, go straight into a dead end. You never know. But I like what Randy was saying earlier, is that there's so many questions that have yet to be answered, and no one with any type of media significance is asking them. Malcolm X, President Barack Obama talks about his love and affection for Malcolm X, Malcolm Shabazz's grandfather. He was in Mexico during the time period that Malcolm was there. Right? So there is this connection that we have to put some light on. And I just wanted to throw that out there and just see where it would go.
Well, I want to mention this, but because I've said many times that the number 9, people communicate through numbers. I agree. Malcolm's killed on the 9th. Malcolm's show on Press TV that everyone sees was posted on April 9th, a month to the day before he's killed. So it's a year and a month before he's killed that program was on. Malcolm essentially got his first day out of jail was February 9th. And it would have been his 29th birthday. It's on the 9th. His grandfather's birthday is on the 19th. And there were all these multiples or numbers related to 9. He would have been 29 had he lived to October. And his birthday is October 8th. But my father's birthday is October 9th. Malcolm's first day of freedom is February 9th, which is my birthday. And so I was looking at these numbers saying, oh, my God. But if you look at it, May 9th was John Brown's birthday. May 9th is the year to the day that Obama said that he was going to fight for homosexuals as the, key interest. If you get what I'm saying, there's a lot of interesting things that came out. And I need to say this to y'all because when I had my last really long conversation with Malcolm, I was talking, that same day, I had several conversations between Malcolm and Dr. Alveda King, who's granddaughter to Daddy King, Martin Luther King's baby brother's oldest child, the first child of the new generation of Kings. What I had been doing, and I had gotten them to agree, was to get the Shabazzes and the Kings to work together. And out of nowhere, Alveda began to tell me on April 26th that Coretta Scott King was murdered in Mexico. Out of nowhere, she just started talking about her being killed in Mexico and how dangerous Mexico was. I did not bring it up. I had no idea that this stuff happened. I remember her being in Mexico. I didn't know why she was there. She said that her aunt had been, essentially, they made her die earlier. They did all kinds of things to Mrs. King in Mexico. Okay? And this is a conversation I had earlier in the day. I talked to Malcolm that night. When Malcolm called me several days later and told me he was in Mexico, I went into clinical depression for 2-3 days. When I woke up on the 9th of May, I called Reverend Pinckney and I called Alveda and said, pray for Malcolm. His life is in danger and I can't help it. That was on the 9th. And that's the day they said he died. There's something about the Mexico that scared the hell out of me, but because they listened to our phones, Dr. Issa can tell you about it, I was afraid to reach out to anyone to see what I could do in Mexico because if they hear it over my phone and they kill him, I feel bad, right? That I did something that hurt this boy. If I did it on the internet and they did it, and it would look like I was in on it. And so all I was doing was praying, God, please get him out of there. What is he doing there? Do you understand what I'm saying? You know, yes. Malcolm had no fear of anything. I want you to know that Malcolm was a fearless person. I think that they used Malcolm's fearlessness because he had been in jail, he had been through all this, to lure him down there. And I believe that when we start talking about all these things, once you understand, Mexico used to be a place where whites could lynch black people with impunity, without any fear. If there was a problem in the United States, there is a book by the Garland Publishers. You know who I'm talking about, Jahi? They had a series of books on primary documents on blacks. It was on the 7th stack in Founders Library. It has black lettering. The Golden series. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know what you're talking about, yes.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about. There's a story in there where the Mexicans came across the border, and I think it was in May, and they lynched 11 black people. And so I've never forgotten reading that Mexicans would come across the border and kill black people when they wanted to. And it's in the. I have to go up and found it and find the page. But all this stuff on Mexico went through my mind when he told me he was in Mexico. And you have to understand that Mexico, what we're not understanding is that Mexicans, the elite of Mexico, which is about 9% or less of Mexico is white. The rest, the 91%, is something else. Okay? They are in relationship with the government of Canada and the United States, and I believe that a deal has been made to phase African Americans out and to take pressure off of Mexico, is to bring them up here to replace us. Killing Malcolm is like a human sacrifice of future leadership, but there's going to be no more movements. And the silence, and this is why I brought up the whole issue of Zionists. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but they fund all the black groups. They fund it. So if you don't hear anything, it means that they don't pay for it. It's the same way a conversation I had with McKinney. I said, hey, McKinney, how come the black people being so silent about Katrina? And Nancy Pelosi told black folks, as well as Rahm Emanuel and Barney Franks, told black folks, don't talk about the war, don't talk about Katrina. So there's been no action real organized action by black folks because they were told not to do it by people who clearly work for organized Jewry. No, it's not the rank and file person that we're talking about, but you bet your ass if there were a group of black folks making life miserable for any number of white people, all black folks would be aware of it and actually made to feel for it. And if we're going to be an ethnic people, we have to learn how to say, hey, look, I'm not mad at a whole group of people, but if you're doing wrong and it's impacting my group, I'm not going to deny what I see. Okay? Mm-hmm. This we must recognize. And there's something else that people need to remember. Go back in the papers and read. Malcolm X carried the reputation of being an anti-Semite. The Nation of Islam has always been considered an anti-Semitic group. Always has. And I'm not saying that they are or are not. I'm only saying to you that people don't like that group. I don't know if you've ever worked with people who didn't like the Nation of Islam like I had to in D.C., and I made the mistake of going to work trying to look nice with the bow tie on, and I nearly got fired for wearing a bow tie. I thought I looked good. They thought I had joined the nation and were prepared to fire me. And yes, all my bosses were, exactly, they were Jewish. I'm not picking on nobody. That's not to get me with back. If talking about my life hurts someone, tell their friends who got money, don't mess with people. Be nice to them. Folk won't criticize you. Be nice to them. So, we can't ignore that people are angry. We can't ignore the fact that the people that followed Malcolm, my friend, Malcolm, the grandfather, the Black Panthers and the others were internationalists. Remember, SNCC, blacks and Jews fell out 66, 67. That's a fact. Over the 6-Day War, that people like Stokely Carmichael and others began to criticize the state of Israel. Let us remember that. Let us remember that that's when SNCC broke up and where blacks weren't tolerant anymore of having their leadership be people in other communities. All right? If you understand right now, internationally, the status of the state of Israel in the minds of your rank and file people is the lowest it's been since the creation of the state of Israel. The boycott and divestment campaign is stronger globally than it's ever been. Imagine someone like Malcolm endorsing the boycott and divestment movement. If he halfway got himself, and I don't even have to get to that because I don't know any of the politicians that have it together. I don't know why black folk have to be perfect when they're doing something, and you can have someone like Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich looks like Kris Kringle on carbohydrates. Some of the strangest characters. Romney looks like Frankenstein. The guy who was running under him as vice president looked like Pinocchio and crystal meth. These people don't have it together. Why is everyone so into whether someone black has it together when everything's been done to mess him up? Pardon saying it like that. Look at Bachman and her strange husband trying to change everybody from gay to straight. He needs to look at himself. They look like somebody I wouldn't let my kid's hand go if he's in the same restaurant as me. Yes, I said it. He worries too much about gay people for me. All these weird people in power, strange people, former Speaker of the House wrestling with little boys, Dennis Hastert and Foley, all these weirdos, the Franklin scandal where they're raping boys from Boys Town, and all this madness out here. And everybody's worried about what Malcolm did as a 12-year-old. Go to hell. In fact, go to hell real fast.
Well, Dr. Randy Short, I just want to thank you for your very lively, as usual, commentary. You always come with it. You shoot from straight from the hip. No trip. And Dr. Issa, we thank you for your service and contribution as well, and keep on fighting the good fight. And Sister Margaret out in Oaktown, thank you for also contributing your perspective. And Queen Assured, thank you so much for co-hosting. This has been wonderful, and hopefully this will go beyond this conversation, that people will actually get this information to disseminate, to empower and not indoctrinate. So I want to thank everybody for participating in this call, in this conversation. And, the words of great Duke Ellington, we love you all madly. And keep on keeping on. The best is yet to come.